Hello everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our virtual event on the pandemic and commercial corridors and how to support them. My name is Jorge Gonzalez. I'm a research analyst with the Metropolitan Housing and Communities Policy Center here at the Urban Institute. And I am joined today by my colleague Jane Park, research assistant also here at Metro, and our two speakers of today, Dr. Emily Tallon from the University of Chicago, and Kendra Macias-Reed from the Franklin Neighborhood Development Corporation in Sacramento, California. We'll learn a bit more about their background and expertise in a few minutes, but first, I need to go over some brief housekeeping items. The event is being recorded and the recording will be posted online afterward. The slides and speaker biographies are also available online. So if you are joining us from your phone, you can also check the slides there so you can follow through the conversation. All participants are muted, but we do encourage you to type your questions or comments into the Q&A box at any time. We're gonna have a Q&A segment at the end of the event. So the agenda for today, we decided to name this event Protecting the Third Place because we wanted to highlight the importance of commercial corridors, not only as places for economic activity, but also as places for social interaction. So it's a place different from the home and the office, so the first and the second places. And we believe that commercial corridors are also social assets for cities. We're gonna start today with a brief introduction into the topic. What are some past trends that commercial corridors have been experiencing, how the pandemic is affecting businesses on commercial corridors and these past trends, and what are some of those questions that remain open that we are seeking answers for. So let us begin. We all know, We all know that the pandemic has affected business activity hard, and particularly business activity for small businesses, and also those businesses that are client-facing, thus likely to be components of our commercial corridors. Now, this chart is from Yelp, and it shows how temporary closures, in this case represented by the light gray line, were high at the beginning of the pandemic, but have since steadily gone down, while permanent closures, which are represented by the red line, have risen consistently. And today, we know that as of September, 60% of the 160,000 closures registered in the Yelp platform were permanent. We also know from this study that the hardest hit businesses are restaurants, retail stores, beauty stores, spas, bars, nightlife venues, fitness venues, all of these key components of commercial corridors. Now, something that is important to note here is that even before the pandemic, the retail industry was not doing very well. You may have heard of terms such as the retail meltdown or even a retail apocalypse, referring to the downturn of retail businesses and the bankruptcy of some of those large corporations in the industry. And this can be explained by different factors. The main ones in no particular order are the rise of e-commerce and online shopping, a shift in consumption patterns where people are now more interested in experiences such as going out for dining and drinking with friends rather than buying objects on a shop, and also some misguided management decisions in large corporations running retail chains. Now, I want to focus a little bit in the second factor, the shift in consumption patterns, because it is interesting when we compare it to what is going on during the pandemic. Now, this chart shows how prior to the 2008 financial crisis, business performance, in this case measured by a performance index, was consistently higher for non-food retail businesses, here represented by the blue line, than for food and drinking businesses, which is represented by the red line. But it's really after the Great Recession where we see the position of those two industries flip, and food and drinking places started outperforming retail ever since, and particularly after 2014, we see that difference widening. But now, what is happening today with the pandemic? This is a zoom into the current moment of the same chart from the St. Louis Fed. And we can see that the pandemic has been particularly damaging for the accommodation and food industry, restaurants and drinking places. And so now the positions have flipped. Now, both industries have been hit quite hard, but it's interesting to see that we now see the retail outperforming restaurants and drinking. And we all know that we can wear masks while shopping in an antique store, but we cannot wear a mask, or it's difficult to wear a mask when we are eating or drinking, at least when we are actively doing that. So this is the same Yelp data that I referenced a moment ago, and it shows just how the hardest hit types of businesses are those that we tend to find in commercial corridors. On the left, you have the businesses that have been able to stay afloat, such as lawyers, offices, architects, accountants. And on the right are those types of businesses that have experienced the highest rates of permanent closures. And if we focus on the bottom line, the bottom row of this set of businesses, we see that those that are the hardest hit are food and drinking places. Now, the problem of business closures becomes hard to tackle because we know that activity attracts activity. And there is a risk that business closures and the property vacancies that come with those create a vicious cycle where vacant storefronts visually deteriorate the landscape, and that in turn decreases foot traffic, which then reduces sales opportunities and further damages those businesses that had survived. And beyond this problem of economic activity affecting commercial corridors, we also know from past research that vacant buildings are associated with negative effects on the surrounding communities. We've seen some evidence on how vacant properties can reduce property values for those properties around that vacant building. They can also increase the risk of fires. They can increase crime rates. And they can also have negative impacts on health through injury, the buildup of trash, and the attraction of rodents. So we find ourselves in uncharted territory. The pandemic is affecting businesses hard. It's changing, to some degree at least, the trends that we had been observing when it comes to the shifts in consumption patterns. We face the risk that the impact of the pandemic creates a vicious cycle that will make it hard to bring corridors back even after the pandemic is over. Winter is here, which also brings along a new set of challenges, specifically on outdoor business activity. And we see these emergency adaptations that are already changing the landscape of commercial corridors, how we experience those corridors, and how we experience the city. And the key questions remain open. How can we stimulate in-person activity while keeping patrons and workers safe? And when we are not able to prevent business closures, how can we contain and minimize the negative effect of business closures? So with that, I hope I've set the stage to hear from our speakers today. And I'm gonna hand it over to my colleague Jane, who's going to introduce the speakers.
Hi guys, I'm Jane, and I have the honor of introducing our first speaker, Dr. Emily Tallon. She is a professor of urbanism at the University of Chicago, where she teaches urban design and directs the Urbanism Lab. She holds a PhD in urban geography from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and a master's in city planning from Ohio State. And she is a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners, the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship. Tallon has written extensively on the topics of urban design, new urbanism, and social equity. Her books include New Urbanism and American Planning, Design for Diversity, Urban Design Reclaimed, City Rules and Neighborhood. She is also a co-editor of the Journal of Urbanism. I have had the great honor of working with her on a couple different research projects during my time at the University of Chicago, and that's a significant reason why I'm here at the Urban Institute today. So I'm really excited to see what Emily is bringing to the webinar today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jane. And thanks for that introduction, Jorge. Hi, everyone. I'm going to be speaking to you here from Chicago and kind of the retail situation going on in Chicago. I want to start by saying I'm going to review some of the research we've been doing at the Urbanism Lab at the University of Chicago related to retail, related to main streets. And I'm going to quickly go over 5 different research projects in brief. And any of the papers that you think you might be interested in about what I'm going to talk about today can be found on our Urbanism Lab website. So I encourage you to go there under the research tab. So as Jorge already alluded to, let me just preface my remarks by saying that, you know, retail has long been in decline. And it even, you know, it started way before the COVID epidemic. It started way before the recession. And if you look at it in a really broad historical frame of mind, you know, what we have been trying to nurture in our cities with storefront retail is really kind of a blip on the historical record when compared to centuries of bazaars and weekly markets and traveling salespeople and direct sales by artisans. That was really kind of the history of commercial life in cities for a very long time. So this ideal of storefront retail that we're living with now is really a product of the 19th century and the era of industrial urbanization, when there was a transition from these temporary markets and more of an itinerant kind of retail approach to the fine-grained pattern of the neighborhood corner store. And these became very highly valued kind of enterprises for very good reasons. But it's been this long decline for over a century. It almost was, you know, had a tax on it from the get-go. So what has been undermining it? Well, none of this will be new to you, but, you know, one force undermining this sort of small scale, small business retail was the 19th century department store. These were urban palaces of consumerism, and they put a lot of destructive forces in motion, drastically reducing the need for skilled clerks, for example, separating that relationship between consumers and retailers, that kind of third place experience that we've been talking about. And, you know, the efficiency of those department stores really fueled many independent store closures. And that was quite a while ago. Also, this won't be news to you, but, you know, storefront retail has also struggled against the efficiency of the chain store for a very long time. The A&P, and this is a fantastic book if you get a chance to pick it up, by Mark Levinson, on the history of the A&P grocery chain. This store started in 1859, and it was the Walmart before there were Walmarts. And at its peak, it was at its peak in the 1940s. But, you know, this idea of the chain store really undermining the mom and pop store has been a very long time in coming. And of course, who can forget the another blow to Main Street retail has been the rise of mail-based consumerism. In the US especially, improvements in mail and parcel shipping were started by, you know, places like Sears and Montgomery Ward, and they really dominated the market. And it was a remarkable parallel to our contemporary e-commerce situation. These were mail-ordered giants that left small town or even big city main streets gasping for air by the end of the 20th century. And then finally, let me just mention, of course, we have the whole issue of suburbanization, car-dependent retail, the many subsidies that way of building has enjoyed. And the upshot, the move toward e-commerce that we're experiencing now, and things like COVID, of course, are but the latest strikes in a centuries-long battle for mass market dominance, and we're kind of going through another wave of that now. Okay, so on to some of these research questions we've been exploring here at the Urbanism Lab at the University of Chicago. We've just been laying out a number of questions that we want to have answered that have to do with Main Street retail, as we're calling it. So one question has been just where and what is this thing called Main Street? And focusing on the situation in Chicago, we settled on a definition that really kind of had three parts to it. Our view of Main Street as a normative ideal, as something we're aspiring toward, is really driven by three criteria, and we call these services, opportunity, and quality. So services is about what the goods and services being provided are really for the local residents. They're for who lives in the neighborhood. So again, this is the ideal. The criteria of opportunity has to do with characterizing a place that provides a platform for entrepreneurialism, for small businesses, of course, a source of employment. So this is very Jane Jacobs kind of view of the world, where you're needing to mix building ages and mix uses, and that has a fundamental effect on the quality of and the identification of a main street. And then finally, quality. This has to do with the pedestrian realm. Are there sidewalks? Are there buildings that are fronting the street? Is it providing a sense of enclosure? Or are there big parking lots fronting the street? So all of these things matter together. The services being provided, the opportunities being provided, and the quality. And we set about trying to figure out in Chicago, where are all these things located? And so, we mapped out block by block, we got the data by block, and we looked at, okay, where are these essentials being offered? Where are the amenities? Where is that mixed primary use? Where are the chain stores versus mom and pops? Where's the mixed building age? We had 8 criteria here, and it was a big sort of big data effort. And the upshot in the end was that we found, putting it all together, that there were only 13 blocks in all of Chicago that had all of these qualities that you might consider would be fundamental for main streets. And so kind of the takeaway conclusion from that is that blocks satisfying a complete picture of the classic American Main Street are really a small fraction of the overall urban framework. And so what you might want to do with that is start playing around with different criteria, changing up things to see what gives you the most bang for your buck. Where is it that you can improve and get a higher percentage of main streets? It's really about conceptualizing and providing a framework for understanding what Main Street is. Okay, a second kind of question we wanted to answer is, okay, so you've decided that main streets are a really good thing for your city. Exactly why is that? And is there data to kind of support that understanding of this idea of Main Street? And so this again was kind of a quantitative approach. We looked at some different assumptions about what it is the main street gets you and the urban dividends, if you will. It's boiling down the literature, it was about associations with density, with diversity, and with providing a more stable neighborhood. And again, we quantified all of this, and we basically, our dependent variable here was to look at two different groups. This is a ANOVA kind of analysis. And we classified everything as being either a Main Street block or a chain store block. Now, we broadened our definition of the Main Street block so we could have a larger sample size. We reduced some of those earlier criteria. But basically, we wanted a block that wasn't dominated by a chain store, such as what you're seeing here. And our explanatory variables were, with density, diversity, and stability. And the upshot of this analysis was that we found that these dividends did hold. Definitely with population density, lower median rent was one of our criteria having to do with stability. And then there were older buildings. We also found that for different kinds of comparisons yielded different kinds of associations. So I'm just, I'm giving you a really brief summary here. I don't think it adequately is capturing all the nuances, but you get the idea of what we were after. But we were satisfied with the conclusions. Another thing we've been really interested in is the regulatory framework for main streets. And this has been a particular interest of mine. I have a book about zoning and the damage that it does. And in the Chicago case, we looked at where were these different main street kind of environments that we're trying to support, and what were the underlying zoning regulations associated with those main streets. And what we found was that it's really this association between the regulations and what we're trying to foster and enable is pretty weak. And specifically, you have a lot of situations like this where you have, what should be the regulation for an urban main street of the kind we've been talking about, is this B1 or B2 zone. We found so many blocks, actually half of the blocks that we studied had B3 zoning, for example, which is automobile-based zoning for shopping centers and not supportive of Main Street. We also found half of the blocks had a residential category zoning on the block, which was single-family detached residence. So that makes absolutely no sense. So that study was all about a call for, trying to, get these regulations to be more supportive of what we're trying to do with the Main Street. A fourth study about mom and pops. So what is really going on with mom and pop stores, as we like to call them, independently owned in a Main Street context. And I sent a team of students out to talk to small retailers. This happened a couple of years ago already, obviously pre-COVID. And, we found some really interesting things. I mean, they were just literally knocking on doors and trying to get people to talk to them about experience as a mom and pop retailer. What are your challenges and opportunities? What's most bothering you? All that kind of good stuff. And what are your frustrations? And kind of the takeaway there is that, first of all, it was really hard to get people to talk to us. Mostly the boutique shop owners, the non-restaurant people, they were easier to get because they had more time. The restaurant folks, they were just swamped, and it was really hard to get them out. And yes, we did have bilingual students. We sent Chinese-speaking students to Chinatown. We had Spanish-speaking students going to the Latinx neighborhoods. So, that was a real challenge. But some of the kind of surprising takeaways there had to do with the fact that many of the small businesses, they were so positive and they were optimistic, and they did not see a problem with things like gentrification, or, they were even commercial gentrification. They didn't feel threatened by e-commerce. They had positive entrepreneurial spirit. You know, I'm just kind of boiling it all down here for you. But one thing we did find was their complaints were really about some things that the city was doing, licensing fees, you know, parking regulations came up all the time. They're very upset with the city's approach to parking. So kind of practical things they were telling us about. And finally, I don't know where I am on time. I'm probably over time at this point, but a study about vacancy specifically. And here I have to give a shout out to Jane Park, who introduced me, who was very involved in doing surveys of business organizations and asking them, so these are the chambers of commerce and other business associations, and asking them, you know, what is your frustration about retail vacancy? How do you see it? Because it is a problem and it's long been a problem. And one of the things I'll just show you she surveyed 18 business organizations throughout the city. We had more success with North area businesses, which was a frustration because the North Side is mostly white and higher income, but those folks were more responsive. One thing that is hugely frustrating, I haven't seen this is actually after COVID set in, but this lack of association between vacancy and market rent. So you have vacancies going up, but also market rent going up. So the vacancy, market rents were not responding to the higher vacancies in the way that you would like to see. And so, you know, the takeaways from that survey, a lot of people talked about vacancy tax relief. This might be unique to Chicago. I'm not sure, but Chicago has this awful policy about really incentivizing vacancy for property owners, and so that they get tax relief if their properties stay vacant. It's completely wacky because people abuse it and, you know, keep their properties vacant for a long period of time. They stress the importance of governments providing small grants for to support innovation in retail, like art installations and non-traditional uses of storefronts. They talked about the need to get directly involved in property leasing, these business associations. So really, which ties into the fourth point there, which was about the need for relationship building. And they talked about how, you know, it was, as a business organization, it was important to actually have the data that you need to track this vacancy problem, get to know the property owners, and, you know, actually a lot of the kind of fault of vacancy was put on property owners, and, you know, that they were not being responsible, they were not caring about what goes on in the street. And so these organizations felt it was important to take a more active role in all of that. And so that was kind of the main takeaway there. So I think in conclusion, this is my last slide, I'll just say that, you know, despite all the challenges, I think that physical retail has unique advantages over e-commerce that ensure continued long-term relevance. Despite the current calamity of, you know, permanent closures, these places will be repopulated, I believe, after the vaccine, in a year from now. And so retail is just a constantly kind of evolving situation, but that need for the experiential storefront and an active street space, I think will continue on. We might see an increase in non-traditional uses, non-traditional retail uses, like you know, residential and office and that kind of thing. So I'll stop there. I think I'm out of time, and happy to take questions, which I think is happening after our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Talon. That was really enlightening. Our next speaker is Kendra Marcius Reed, and she joined the Franklin Boulevard Business Association and the Franklin Neighborhood Development Corporation as Deputy Director in April 2020, bringing with her over 15 years of experience in business banking, community development, and city planning. She and her husband currently own and operate a residential construction company in Sacramento. And in addition to her current role, she serves on the City of Sacramento's Planning and Design Commission as the District 5 appointee. And so, Kendra, we are very excited to hear your experiences as kind of a leader in grassroots business advocacy. And so, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Jen. I really appreciate the introduction. I didn't add it in there, and I probably should let everybody know that I actually hold a bachelor's degree in urban studies from the University of Washington. So definitely have a background in urban studies and planning as well, and really helps drive some of the work I do today. So I would like to start by here, getting my screen. I'm not able to get to the next slide, so if we could, oh, there we go. All right, so I wanted to thank the Urban Institute for having me as a panelist today, and thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Kendra Macias Reed, and I am the Deputy Director for both the Franklin Boulevard Business Association, which is a local property and business improvement district here in Sacramento, and also for the Franklin Neighborhood Development Corporation, which is their 501c3 partner. Like Jen said, I started in April of 2020. So I actually started my position as a deputy director amid the pandemic. So it's been really an interesting experience. So let's get started. So I want to give you a little bit of a background about our district. So we're located in Sacramento County, which is on the left side of the map. That's the County of Sacramento, and then we are one of the major commercial corridors within the city of Sacramento. Our PBID spans roughly 2.5 miles from north to south, and we are adjacent to a major highway. We have over 500 businesses in our district, and many of them are Latino-owned businesses. Historically, we were a port of entry for Latino immigrants in Sacramento, and we remain a very remarkably diverse district. We also have a strong Hmong and Vietnamese presence. Our district has a variety of industries. We have restaurants, retail, professional services, auto repair shops. We've got hair and nail salons. We've got grocery stores. You name it, we've probably got it. And all of our businesses serve the local community. I wanted to mention the Urban Institute blog that Jen and Jorge just recently published, and they coined commercial corridors as the drivers of local economies, and I couldn't agree more. Here in Sacramento, small businesses and our commercial corridors are the backbone of our local economy. Our commercial corridor in Franklin Boulevard generates roughly $650,000 in annual sales tax revenue for the city, and we both directly and indirectly support over 3,800 jobs. The majority of our businesses are small, minority-owned mom and pop shops. We have very, very little chain or corporate entities in our district. So I'm going to dig into the sort of impacts to COVID-19 in our district. We have 15 total vacancies in our district, 7 of which have occurred during the start of this pandemic. And here in the state of California and in Sacramento County, we've been shut down since I believe the second week of March. We sort of slowly started to open back up in phases, and we just received a county health directive yesterday to be shutting back down all of our restaurants and some of our retail. So we're going through another wave of shutdowns. So the closures that you see here, we're expecting that number to increase significantly over the next month or so. We have many businesses that have been open very little time during this pandemic and are months behind in rent. the impacts are fairly significant. The pictures that you see here are actual pictures in our district of from our clean and safe team, which helps clean the public right-of-ways in our districts. A part of what we do as a PBID is public space management. And so we've had a significant uptick in illegal dumping, trash and debris from homeless encampments, broken windows and theft. We're seeing that a lot more heavily in the districts, specifically, I think, related to many of the businesses that are not just shut down or having vacancies, but also because some of them their businesses haven't closed quite yet, but they're just operating remotely, and so their office or their their physical retail space might be closed. So certainly an uptick there. We've also had an increase in businesses requesting help with social media, advertising, marketing services, and tools to help them pivot to an online presence. Many of the retail and restaurant businesses that we have, some of them have been in business here 50, 60, 70 years on our corridor. They're really looking for ways and opportunities and guidance to help them pivot. Either whether that's to create a strong social media and online presence, or if they just didn't have a menu, if they're a restaurant and they didn't have a menu on their website prior to this, now is the time to offer a menu and offer online ordering and delivery services. So I'll go into some of the outreach that we've been doing here in a second, but I just wanted to mention we've been doing a significant amount of outreach over the last few months. And the greatest identified need for our businesses has been immediate financial relief. And I'll get into that into more detail in just a second. Okay, so I also wanted to mention that since April of 2020, we have a very small team of 3 employees. And we've been passing out masks, gloves, hand sanitizer. We've passed them out to almost 100 or over 100 businesses in our corridor since April. There's a continuous need for businesses to have this personal protective equipment to be able to operate under the county health directives. So a part of what our role has been as a PBID is to ensure that they have the equipment that they need to operate. I think it's important to mention, so Jorge mentioned earlier in his presentation that we've been experiencing a shift in the way consumers are purchasing products. And I can tell you from the experience we've had since March, I think a strong online presence, whether you're a retail or restaurant business, is critical to the success amid the pandemic. Offering online menus, like I mentioned before, delivery services, curbside pickup, those are all really key to your business success moving forward. So I want to talk a little bit about the programs and partnerships here locally in Sacramento that we've been working on. The first is called the Sacramento Inclusive Economic Development Collaborative. And although this is a 15 partner agency collaborative, and although we actually were not created amid the pandemic, we created this collaborative about a year prior to the pandemic hitting. I want to mention the importance of having this collaborative for our business community here in the city of Sacramento. It has been essential to advocating for our businesses and helping them get the financial and other help that they need to survive this pandemic. We're a 15 partner agency. It's including our Black, Asian, and Hispanic chambers of commerce. We also have representation of many of the PBIDs that are located in historically disadvantaged communities here in Sacramento. Our corridor being one of them. So since the pandemic started, we have conducted business outreach to over 260 businesses in our district over the last 2 months alone. We still have a lot more work to go because, like I mentioned earlier, we have 500 businesses in the district. We have, so some of the programs that we've been advocating for have been, one, we have an alfresco program here in the city of Sacramento that is providing $3,000 grants to small businesses who apply, and that money will help them purchase the materials that they need, whether that's outdoor heaters, tables and chairs, or pop-up tents, to create a sort of makeshift parklet, whether that's on a sidewalk or if it's in a parking lot, so that they can operate outdoors. And that has been a very successful program. We've also been able to, we had a local push called Donate for Sacramento, which a lot of people donated to, and we created a fund to provide $1,000 micro grants to businesses. And really what these businesses need are not so much the federal loan programs, but they just need money, they need grants. We also had a SAC Recover. We were able to advocate through our collaborative for a small business forgivable loan program in partnership with the city of Sacramento. We received an $89 million CARES fund allocation here in the city of Sacramento. And we advocated to get that money as either microloans or based on full-time equivalent employment out to the businesses as soon as possible. 75% of those funds had to go to disadvantaged communities located in promise zones and our opportunity zones and community development block grant eligible areas. We were also able through that advocacy to purchase 500 live scan temperature scanners, and we are going to be distributing them out to our businesses in the next couple of weeks. Those are, they look kind of like a tablet and they just scan your face. And we're hoping that that's another component that will help these businesses continue to operate during the pandemic and the closures. We've also here in the city created an emergency ordinance to suspend commercial evictions due to reduced rent payments or no rent payments due to impacts to not receiving any money or not meeting your financial goals during the pandemic. And that one of the critical pieces to that ordinance included a free tenant and landlord mediation service. That is a critical piece to keeping businesses and property owners thriving during this pandemic, because like I said, a lot of businesses are months behind in rent right now. I do want to highlight that the outreach that we've been doing and the advocacy and the work that we've been doing here locally these policies really need to address some of the racial, economic, and structural disparities that we feel were already present pre-pandemic, but really further exacerbated amid this pandemic. Certainly we 95824 is one of the area codes in which our corridor lies, and we've just received higher rates of Latinos testing positive for COVID-19. And so I really want to recognize that there is structural disparities that I feel like some of these policies, again, including the small business forgivable loan program that we created and advocated for, can really address some of these disparities. One thing I would really like to mention is that federal financial relief programs such as the Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL loan program, from our experience, they were really only accessible to businesses that were already utilizing formal accounting and payroll services. And many of our minority-owned small mom and pop shops did not utilize these formal financial structures for their businesses, and some of them were just cash only businesses. And so that created a situation where they not only couldn't qualify for these loans, but they also couldn't apply for these loans. And that just further exacerbated, I think, some of the racial and economic disparities. And so again, thinking about that when we're creating these policies moving forward. I also wanted to address the need for being able to disseminate this information into various languages. I know Professor Talon had touched on this briefly. Our outreach included, identifying the language barriers, because that's, I think, really critical in when offering these grant and loan programs. And I think, so one of the things that we've done as a district also has, we purchased food trucks. And we feel like this food trucks are an opportunity, or a potential business incubation opportunity for us to advocate, to get entrepreneurs and, to keep entrepreneurs operating in the food industry in particular. And we're trying to come up with creative ways to work with the city to reduce the permitting process, to get people into these food trucks and trailers. So, again, very high level overview. There's, a lot more that we could talk about today, but I kind of want to start wrapping things up and talk about really the key takeaway from all of this is that business organizations like PBIDS and your local chambers of commerce really need to be at the table when making these policy decisions and having these policy discussions that will impact the businesses. I mean, we've created relationships, strong relationships over the years with property and business owners. And this is really, I think, an opportunity where governmental organizations can, again, bring these partnerships to the table to have these conversations. And I think this collaborative that we have in Sacramento has certainly been, a blessing to advocate for these businesses and their future success. So with that, I wanted to wrap it up, and I'm open to questions. And Jen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kendra. And so now in the last 10 minutes of our presentation, we will be entertaining questions and answers from the audience. And I know that many of you have questions for our brilliant speakers. So I think one that touches on a couple questions raised is, what will long-term design plans for commercial corridors look like? Because a lot of them right now are very auto-centric, and we are wondering if the pandemic is going to change that trajectory to be less auto-centric and have more pedestrian access. And so if either of you have insights into that, we would love to know.
I can certainly speak briefly. So we have two public transit stops in our district. And one of the things that we did locally here in Sacramento about a year ago is we created and approved at City Council a transit-oriented development ordinance where you could not have any auto-related uses. So land use, we would not permit any auto-related land uses within a half a mile of a transit stop. That has certainly impacted our district, I think, because we have actually a very strong presence of auto-related uses currently. But I don't think, I think one of the things that we've found is that these auto-related businesses actually haven't suffered amid this pandemic. They've actually, when we've conducted the business outreach, they've actually been not hit financially because they were deemed an essential service and have stayed open every single day during this pandemic. And so I also think it's interesting because drive-throughs have also seen an uptick in business, and we have 2 drive-throughs in our district that have thrived as well because the indoor and outdoor eating has been shut down essentially. And so I think it's interesting. We're certainly seeing sort of digression rate happening locally, but I think that is going to be short-lived. I think we've made a lot of progress prior to the pandemic, and we will continue to do so post-pandemic.
Professor Talon.
Well, I'll just say that there's a big difference between the reality that we're having to live with and what is the right thing to do and what is the right policy response. So a pedestrian-based retail corridor is the gold standard, and transit served. So if we're seeing upticks in drive-through and automobile dependency, that to me is not at all changing the basic idea that our policies should not support the proliferation of that kind of experience. I mean, we need pedestrian-based retail corridors. We need people to access things with their own 2 feet or their bikes or their transit. We do not need more car dependency. So I think that I guess I'm one of those people that thinks that the COVID and the pandemic is gonna go away, and we are gonna have maybe another year of pain, but we're gonna get right back to our desire to, and if anything, sort of the silver lining of what we're experiencing right now is our renewed appreciation for walking-based, pedestrian-oriented Main Street commercial corridors. And we now have more resolve than ever to try to support them.
Our next question is a little more vacancy related. Lindell asked, I've read that San Francisco increases tax rates on properties that remain vacant. Would this help? And Professor, you know that we've done research in Chicago and that they actually had the opposite policy, the vacancy tax relief, which also hurts commercial corridors in some ways. So do you have insights into what the right tax regulations are to regulate vacancies?
Yeah, I'll just say that San Francisco consistently comes up as being the city with the innovation when it comes to supporting Main Street retail through things like tax incentives, and also even protecting mom and pop retail by making them legacy businesses and making sure that they don't get priced out, and regulations on limiting chain stores and their ability to go into a block. So San Francisco is really the one, followed by New York. I would say Chicago is behind the times, and this idea of incentivizing vacancy through the tax structure is being fought tooth and nail. And what that requires is agitating the tax assessor, having meetings with the tax assessor, trying to get the local council people to meet with the tax assessor. So it's like this huge political energy being expended to overturn that. And it's so perverse. So, I don't know. It's San Francisco. I don't know. Somehow they are really able to do things. Now, I know that there's been backlash too. There's always backlash, because even a policy that's somehow against chain stores, like I know San Francisco had, maybe it was Berkeley or Oakland specifically, that said, thou shalt not have a chain store go into, selected blocks. Some people don't, a lot of people don't necessarily agree with that at all. And in fact, chain stores are not all bad if they do things like renovate old buildings and if they provide goods and services that people need. So there's all kinds of gray areas and political debates.
Kendra, did you have anything to add to that, or should I go to the next question?
Go ahead. We don't have any local, any policies set up structurally that way, so it doesn't affect us.
Okay. This next question is kind of about how to create outdoor space in colder regions. A couple people asked about this. Rachel asked, hi from Baltimore. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on ways to advocate for design interventions for corridor shifts toward pedestrian-centric areas amid pandemic for longer term. How do you advocate for them with closures and winter weather in mind? And Beryl also asked, how can we work together to help sustain those efforts, including the removal of parking, and deem them public space even during shutdowns?
Well, I can certainly talk about what we've done here in Sacramento. The city has purchased a bunch of outdoor heaters, and each district is allocated a certain amount. And a part of what we have to do as a PBID is to, get that information out to our business owners, and they can go and pick one up. I mean, it's one heater, it's, per business. So it's certainly not, I can say not what they need, but it's better than nothing. And it's a start. So we actually just entered into a shutdown here. So outdoor seating is actually no longer permissible at this point. And so all of the alfresco program that we had, and all of the sort of temporary parklets and outdoor space that they had set up is now not able to be utilized. So I think once we get our ICU capacity down, or up rather, our ICU capacity, you know, up, and then we start moving back into a more phased approach to open. You know, again, I go back to the advocacy efforts collectively of our collaborative. It's really critical. You know, if you just come as one PBID voice, you're just one PBID voice. But if you partner up with your other PBIDs and your chambers in your disadvantaged communities in particular, I think you have a stronger case to make and stronger advocacy overall.
I want to underscore what you just said, Kendra, because that is another thing that came out in our survey of the 75 small businesses. So many of them were not connected at all to any organization. And it was really surprising to us. They barely even knew that there was a Chamber of Commerce. So that is really and then on the other hand, when we interviewed the organizations, they were talking about how much they wanted to get involved in everything. So, you know, it's getting these two groups to connect is really going to be the key. And just with outdoor dining, there's a lot of that going on in cold Chicago. The igloo things, and but people are making fun of them, like, okay, so now you're sitting outside, but you're still inside, and you know, what's going on here? Like, is that better? How is that better? You're just colder. So I don't know how successful that is.
Mm-hmm. We only really have time for one more question, but I think this is an interesting one. Peg asks, are there models that tie this work with equity? For example, recruiting for minority-owned businesses to fill vacancies. So it's like, how do we fill these vacancies? What are the interventions? And whoever wants to take that can take it.
You know, that is a really great question. And a question, again, our collaborative is asking ourselves now. We had a contract with the city of Sacramento through the end of this year to conduct our business outreach. And now that we're finally wrapping that up, we've just sat down in our last meeting last week to ask ourselves, what next? Again, I go back to stressing how critical this collaborative and this partnership is, because we are many voices that can advocate for our business community here in Sacramento, and City Council listens to that. And so that is a part of our conversation. So again, great question, and I don't have an answer for you, but that'll hopefully be in our next conversation for after the new year.
I'm gonna jump in here very quickly just to second what Dr. Talon was talking about, San Francisco being at the forefront of these urban policies, because we know that San Francisco has utilized this initiative to use vacant properties on commercial corridors to deliver COVID-related services such as testing. So that is an interesting way to leverage these vacant spaces. And in other areas, we've seen public art also being used in these spaces, and taking these creative placemaking approaches to leverage vacancies.
And Jorge, one more thing I'd like to mention is, again, I go back to the food trailers and food truck options, like pop-up options. We're considering that in our district right now to activate some of those vacant spaces. What that looks like, again, in partnership with the county and the city of Sacramento, I'm not quite sure, but we're having those discussions right now as a short-term possibility to activate that space.
Okay, well, it is 12 p.m. I want to thank for just bringing so much content and information to our audience, and we will be following up on our registration list with a recording of this webinar as well as contact information, because I know that some of you might want to get in touch with Kendra or Emily or me and Jorge, and so we'll have that information available. But have a great rest of your Thursday, and thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.